All right, welcome back, everybody. Today I want to talk about two different ways of how Photoshop can deal with and think about images. And this is a journey down for another whole course, basically. But I wanted to look at some basic ideas because you're going to come across them in next lesson, and also some other things that come up in videos. So the first thing I want to look at is how Photoshop kind of generally thinks of images and how it recalls them and remembers them. So I'm going to make a little circle here and just fill it with, let's say, a blue color. Go and deselect that. So at its heart, an image is made up of lots and lots of little squares, which we call pixels, short for picture elements here. And you can see this is really, when you zoom in, that's all this smooth circle is. It's not actually that smooth if you look at it. It's a whole host of lines. And if I got rid of these faded bits here, you'd actually see it would look kind of retro and choppy at the edge here. And we trick the eye to think that it looks smooth. If I zoom out to my 100%, like that, that looks like a pretty smooth line to me, but it's actually not. And it's fooled because we kind of fade this out, or what we call, we anti-alias it, is the technical term for this. And really the cool part about image manipulation is that all we have to do, if I say grab a pencil tool here, I have a little one square pencil, and if I go to white here, I basically just change the image by turning on or off or altering the colors of these pixels. And if I zoom out, you can see there that little bits there, and from the simplest to the most complex graphics, that's really all we're doing. And this is a concept called raster graphics. So I've got a very good opacity there, and I'll pick a smaller brush. There we go. Raster. Oh, I still don't have good opacity there. Raster graphics. And really, raster graphics, the idea is that it's just the turning on and turning off and the manipulation of pixels. Everything is measured in pixels. The entire canvas is a whole bunch of little tiny dots that the computer remembers every single one of those dots and what color each one of those dots is. And that's, in its heart, the idea. I can get rid of that there. And actually would like to copy that layer, and just so we can have two copies of them there. But this is not the only way. And one of the benefits of this is that, filters that I add or erasing and drawing and adding things is all I'm really doing. Oh, let's get to the right layer there. All I'm really doing is adding or subtracting pixels and manipulating them. So we can also run into some weird problems, though, with this. And the idea being is that if I were to make this really, really big, I'm going to zoom out here so we can see this. Essentially, I am adding pixels to this image. I'm adding a lot of pixels because I'm making it hundreds of times bigger. And the computer has to figure out, or Photoshop in this case, has to figure out where pixels get added and how many pixels get added, because I've just made it twice as big. And those pixels have to be positioned in places. So you can see as I get bigger here, it's actually faking this because a pixel is a fixed size. It can't get bigger or smaller here on my screen. It's giving me a little sample here, and notice I've done a transform, so I can hit this checkbox to fix it. Now we get really rough edges here. Photoshop does a pretty good job and has a bunch of math formulas behind it that when I hit that checkbox, it's going to try and figure out where the pixels should go and how to make it look as good as possible based on the size that I've made it. But I've expanded this very, very large. So it's going to struggle a little bit as we go along. Normally this would be a bit faster. So you can see, yeah, it's really smoothed it out. But if I zoom in, you can see it's only done an okay job here. This is not a smooth edge. You can actually still see some of the in light blue there, those blocky steps, but it's tried to fade everything in so that it still looks like a smooth edge. And this is one of the downsides of raster graphics. If I am saying drawing something and then I want to explode it to billboard size, well, I might get some fuzziness. Or take a low quality image, and you've probably done this before, grabbed a small picture from the internet and expand it to your size, you're going to get fuzziness. There's just no real way around it in raster graphics. However, we also have another option, and Photoshop is not designed as what we call a vector graphics tool. Adobe has another product called Illustrator specifically for that. However, it has thrown in a few vector options here, and we're going to need them for later on with the type tool. But let's look at the vector graphics here. So there is a selection of vector graphics, this little tool here. These are called shape tools, but they're actually vector graphics. So I'm going to grab this ellipse tool here, and let me just pick up that same blue paint color, just so we can do a good comparison here. And I'm going to make a circle that's about the same size. And you see up comes a blue circle. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is that over on the layers there, it looks a little bit different. It's got this little marking here with the gray spot and the four edges here, and it's already named it ellipse 1. It knows what's in that shape. Now, from a working standpoint, just like so, it looks pretty much the same as the other blue circle did before. If I zoom in, I can still see the pixels are there. However, you can see they're not quite as faded as before, and we get this little blue line going through it, indicating this is a vector shape. So the difference between vector shapes and raster, or vector graphics and raster graphics, is that vector graphics are calculated and figured out not by turning on and off little dots, but by some form of a math formula that indicates, well, there is a line that needs to be drawn from these coordinates to these coordinates, and it has this arc. And so there's a bunch of math going on behind the scenes. And the nice part about that is that if I make this bigger, I'm taking this circle and I'm multiplying its area by, I don't know, 100 or so. The math can be done really nicely. It doesn't have to figure out where pixels should go and where they shouldn't go and how to add them. It just says, hey, make this math formula twice as big. And you can see immediately I make that huge and I get none of the jaggies. And when I hit checkbox and apply that transformation, it first of all takes almost no time. And you can see on the edge the difference here. Let me get them close together as we zoom in, that this vector graphic is perfectly smooth and exactly the arc we wanted, and it doesn't have any of that fadedness that the raster graphic does. The downsides of this is that this is a math formula. So if I try and grab my eraser and take away some of those pixels, I get a little warning. It says this shape layer must be rasterized before proceeding. Do you want to do that? No, I don't want to do that at the point, because here's the idea. How do I take one pixel out of a math formula? I can't. This is a line that's been generated by a math formula that you'll learn in, say, grade 10 or 11. But I can't just take out a little bit. I'm kind of stuck with the whole thing. Now I can add lines and curves and a whole bunch of other stuff later on, but to be honest, it's not going to work. So very nicely, we can scale these up as large or as small as I want, which is really great for if I'm making a logo for a business card or a billboard or anything like that. It doesn't matter the size, it'll always look crisp and clean and nice, but I can't apply a lot of the other things. I can't smudge things, I can't use the liquify filter, I can't move, and anything that's moving and shifting pixels around as pixels is not going to work very well. Uh, Now, before you go and say, well, the only thing vector graphics are good for is the ability to make them larger and smaller, and you're really limited as to what you can do, there are lots of other options there. First of all, there are a whole bunch of different vector tools here in Photoshop that you can work with, and you can also, let's say, I'm going to build a triangle here. As a vector graphic. We can also do things that we can do in math, like I can resize that and I can rotate it and I can squish it in different directions and I can pick it up and, oh, I'm going for control here. I can stretch and shape in other directions. So there's a lot of power here that can be done with the vector graphics. And we also have the pen tool. And as I said in Illustrator, that we can go down that road in another time. Or if you're really interested in playing with some of the vector stuff, you can do that. But if you go do a quick Google search for vector art, you can see that there are large numbers of amazing things that can be done. Beautiful graphics that have their own real distinct look and feel to them. You'll notice they look a little more cartoony, but not really cartoony. They're just their own distinct art style. They're often larger panels and larger sections here, but you can get some really creative, interesting looks for them and even some cool photography like things, but especially great at line drawings. The other really nice thing about vector art is that you can use it in a lot of other different formats nicely. For instance, if you're doing laser cutting or engraving or etching or CNC work or wanting to do lino cuts and all sorts of other applications, you have math formulas that other mathematically controlled things like, say, a laser cutter or a 3D printer could follow these angles and lines because it's not having to worry about a whole bunch of dots. It actually has a math formula that can be applied, and you can do some very cool things with it. So uh, just so you know that vector graphics and raster graphics can live both together in Photoshop. They are treated separately, and that if you want to, you can in fact, once you've created something that is a raster graphic, or sorry, a vector graphic, like you've made this giant circle or this triangle here, you can then very easily, under layer here, rasterize. We can turn it into a raster, the layer or the shape or anything here. I'm going to just rasterize this triangle layer. You can see that that little square goes away. And now once that's been done, I can grab my eraser and I could change that. I could throw a filter on. I could do all sorts of different things that I wanted to that new raster layer. The problem is it's a lot harder to go back the other way. Once you have once you have a raster graphic, it is very challenging to turn it into a vector graphic. Basically, the computer has to go through and try and figure out a math formula that best fits that. Now, it's doable in some other programs, but it's way easier to go from vector to raster than from raster to vector. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next tutorial on the type tool.